such a painful way. Much too much starch in the loincloth. We've seen that before. But it's very, very rare to see Christ crucified on an angle like this, because normally he's in the center, front and center, and then the two thieves on either side. And here we can barely see this thief because he's gone all skinny, just sort of looking straight past him to this rather, again, almost sort of caricature-y, sort of deliberately ugly character. And then the usual hand-wringing. I mean, this could almost be a Grunewaldian hand-wringing couple of people here, John and Mary. That's it. It's not to get too distracted, but this is a more conventional format, at least, of Christ in the middle, thieves on either side. Christ usually sort of slightly leans his head to the one side, his right side, because that's the good side. So you assume that this is, if you remember, there was a good thief and a bad thief. The good thief, like St. Longinus, who happens to be down here on the horse with this amazing hat. And we'll meet that hat again in a minute. Much too much starch again here. So this is the one who recognizes, this one doesn't, turns away, so he's doomed, but he'll go to heaven, so that's all right. So that's a little bit more, but again, it's Cranach, so it's weird, and he's got this horse off some sort of a carousel in a fun fair somewhere, and it's not supposed to be naturalistic at all. But he's a really interesting fellow again. I mean, they all are. And again, look at this lovely sculpture that somebody did when just sitting on a little brick wall. Love that. Doing a nice little drawing, I guess. So, as I say, 1472 1553. He was hugely successful. He's not the biggest name nowadays because he's rather overshadowed, I guess, by Dürer. But he was a painter and an engraver. Once Dürer, I think he really started the popularizing of prints, and that all links into the printing process for books as well, the sort of general spread of knowledge, now the spread of visual images as well. But Cranach, he also owned a printing shop, which makes sense, but he owned a drugstore, an apothecary. Studied with his father, and then there's a wonderful thing, we'll see Dürer doing this as well, something called the Wanderjahre, which is kind of like, in Europe it's called the gap year. You can't go straight from high school to university. I think it's a great idea. You have to go and see the world and get a little bit edgy. It would have done all of you a lot of good if you'd had a Wanderjahre, just to mature a little bit before you go to school and sort of get writing boring essays and things all the time. But he wandered up and down the river Danube, and he got to Vienna, which would have been exciting. 1505 though, and he's still fairly young, sort of not even quite 30. He becomes court painter to something called Duke Friedrich the Wise, who was the Elector of Saxony. Have I got him? Oh no, this is Cranach. I've seen it said to be a self-portrait, but I think it's a portrait by his son, Cranach the Younger. He's 77 years old, so looking pretty grand still. This is the Elector of Saxony. Remember I said about the political thing, the sort of the duchies and the counties and everything else. So he's a very, very powerful fellow, Elector of Saxony. But this was the sort of best kind of steady job for an artist. You get attached to a noble house, you get a paycheck, basically. Usually, they don't always come up with that. But in the service of the Duke, he set up a very thriving workshop. He's in the town of Wittenberg, where he served also for years as a town councillor. He was mayor several times, so sort of a good, solid citizen. In 1508, the Duke sort of actually knighted him, but he gave him the right to bear arms, B-E-A-R, not B-A-R-E. And that was the emblem that he chose. This is a blown-up detail, a sort of winged serpent creature. Not sure about the ring, but anyway, and it's got a crown. And this is what you see, the way he signs his works, basically, until, I think it's 1534, maybe 1537, I can't remember exactly when. His older son dies, Lucas Cranach the Younger dies. So after that, the serpent puts its wings down as a kind of sign of mourning somehow. Another famous Wittenberger was Martin Luther. The 95 Theses were all nailed up on a church in Wittenberg. And this is Cranach's portrait of Martin Luther. I like his portrait. Right, nice sort of linear, not that much soft modelling or anything, just kind of the outline, and then but really filled with character rather nicely. And this is, I don't want to talk about the whole thing, but the bottom part, remember this is called the predella panel. shows Martin Luther actually on the job preaching. It's one of the things that, this is in a way the downside of Protestantism, was that they hated religious imagery, and because they thought, second commandment, thou shalt not worship graven images. And the Catholics said, of course, you're not worshipping the image, you're worshipping the people in the image, and these are the teaching aids and things like that. But the Protestants destroyed enormous numbers of religious treasures, the sorts of things we've been looking at. Remember I said even the Ghent altarpiece was hidden away up in the tower of the church, otherwise we could have lost that as well. But what the Protestants emphasized, rather than the visual stuff and all the trappings and the incense and the stained glass, they emphasized the Word of God. So it's all about preaching, sort of in rather a puritanical way, without any ostentation whatsoever. So there is Martin Luther in his little pulpit thing here, far too much starch in the loincloth here. And that, if in case you're ever wondering what Martin Luther looked like dead, that's it. This is his on his deathbed, also painted by Cranach. But this again is sort of split parts anyway, because you're working for the church and the Catholic Duke, what have you, but also clearly Cranach was a Protestant, and again the sort of favourite artist of Luther. Nobody painted Luther the same way that Cranach did. See, see the little buggy thing there. That's the serpent, the monogram actually. Now this is his most loyal patron, who again is obviously a Catholic. This is Cardinal Albrecht of Brandenburg. Don't worry about these. Cranach, I'm just showing you the variety of his work. He's not a major player. But this is, again, this fellow, but he's shown as St. Jerome. Come back to that in just a second. In his study, this wonderful interior space. 1526 it was done. It's not tiny, 4 feet high, which is quite big. It's actually in Sarasota, Florida. If you go there, which you won't, there's a famous American circus, the Ringling Brothers Circus. They made so much money, some of them bought lots of art, and they made the Ringling Museum and Art Gallery in Sarasota. So this is the ill-gotten gains of lots of clowns and elephants and things. Anyway, what we're looking at here, see, this chap, he's enormously important. He was a cardinal and an archbishop and an elector. So he's got both religious and political clout, basically. As I say, shown as St. Jerome, as the scholar, basically. But you've got all the stuff around it. You've got a nice little Madonna and Child on the wall. You've got your little statue of the crucifix, still with too much starch in the thing there. Hourglass, because the sands of time are running out, because you're always being reminded that you're going to be dead in a week, so behave yourself. Sort of bottle glass, but yeah, that's not good, is it? I love this chandelier, though, with all these little cherubic characters playing around in it up there, and more over here. You've got stuff in there. To be honest, I've got no idea what's all there. There's just a menagerie of birds and animals, and some of them mean things and some of them don't. Now, nearly always one of the attributes for St. Jerome is the cardinal's hat, and he actually lived, give or take, 400 AD, and he was actually from Yugoslavia, Dalmatia, just opposite Italy, and for a while he lived in Rome, and he had some sort of a courtier-like job in Rome, but at that time they didn't actually have cardinals. But he gets the hat and the robes later on, and that's how you identify him, basically. There's a squirrel playing with his nuts. That's the lion from the famous story that he took the thorn out of the paw of the lion, and it just followed him around forever. Peacocks and a beaver. That's our first beaver in the whole course, isn't it? Industriousness, basically. If you ever watched a beaver, they work awfully hard. And a little mother with the jet. It's kind of cute. But you see, all the stuff over here, this should be lunch for the lion, wouldn't it? So it becomes a kind of peaceable kingdom. They're all just sitting around because, under the protection, if you like, of St. Jerome / Cardinal Albrecht. He also gets to go outdoors for it sometimes. And this is the same chappie, but now in this rather nice landscape. You see, he's hung his hat up on the tree, and he's got quite similar, army of animals already. He's got his crucifix, he's got everything, he's got the deer, he's got the lion, he's got the beaver, he's got the whatever that is. Looks like a partridge. And it's all the sort of stuff, and he's got his inkwell, he's always... See, the importance of Jerome for the church was that after he'd done the time in the desert, the usual thing, he comes back, and I think he settled in Bethlehem, because that's where the holiest stuff was. And he translated the entire Bible. I've mentioned him in passing before, I'm sure. And it was his Bible, a little bit after the pictures we're looking at, was adopted by the Catholic Church as the sort of official text. There were all these slightly different variations. So his one, he taught himself Hebrew so that he could get the old texts and translate them into Latin. And his, it's called the Vulgate. That's still, as far as I know, so that's one reason why Jerome is revered. There's an odd story that I read and now I've forgotten already. So see, there's the lion chasing a bunch of people out there because they'd stolen his donkey or something, and he goes and gets it back. I can't think it's all that interesting. Anyway, that's him rather nicely outdoor. But the inside one, when you see Jerome at the far side of the deck, with this rather sharp perspective pushing his back into the picture, it's a dead ringer for that in some way. And this is the best ever image by Dürer of St. Jerome. And we'll look at this more later on. It's absolutely lovely. Again, if you like the idea of the contemplative life, because the companion to this is sort of the active life, the knight on the horse and riding into battle sort of thing. And now you're the scholar in his study. And in fact, it's sort of in a cloistered area here. You've just put a kind of partition in behind you. You've got your hat on the wall. I mean, look at this. This is an engraving. And I'll show you next time, the woodcuts, which are amazing, and then he goes from that into engraving. And nobody was doing anything even remotely close to this. He just goes, boom, raises these to a new sort of art form. You look at the bottom of glass here, and then you get more bottom glass, because you got the reflection on the wall, for God's sake. And all these stuff, the hourglasses, and I mean, what a neat stuff. Look, he's got all these little things to hang his little memos and things like that. He's got. See, there's an asperge. Remember from the Arnolfini wedding, for doing a bit of dusting, but also scattering holy water, perhaps. Rosary. I'm not sure what the scissors were for. Maybe for cutting the string of life, the thread of life. Maybe not. More nice cushions beaten up. Lion and lunch. Shoes off. All that. But see, the thing with these images, you have to really get an actual one and get a magnifying glass and just look through it and just see the extraordinary detail. I mean, even the grain in the ceiling. I mean, again, all the way back to the very beginning, it doesn't make it great art, but it sure as hell helps, doesn't it? I mean, this is skill plus artistry. Anyway, so I don't think Cranach is quite on the same level as Dürer somehow. This is also, I hope this isn't important, because this is St. Jerome out in the desert. My bad joke again before the invention of cold showers, that if you have all these naughty thoughts, you have to chastise yourself and purify yourself. So he's got the rock in his hand. Leonardo, the most famous artist, probably who does that. Lovely raggedy landscape. It's really quite beautifully done. Again, you're contemplating Christ. My complaint always is it's not a good desert at all, is it? So you should be a bit too green somehow. It's a pretty dodgy looking lion this time, isn't it? Anyway, so these are, what Cranach does is take certain themes and almost work them to death in a way, because I've said it before so many times that, I mean, there's no real sense of originality. You don't have to be new and different every single time. If something works, do it again. And he does a whole series of images of Adam and Eve in paradise at the moment of the temptation. So you've got the serpent swooping down here. This is the tree of knowledge. Remember that there's what's the other tree in the Garden of Eden?
It's life.
Life?
Yeah.
That's a good one. So there's the tree of life and there's the tree of knowledge. And then remember God said, help yourself, it's all there, just don't eat the fruit off that tree. And so, as we saw, he turns his back and munch, and it's all over. And so this is the tree of knowledge, because you're not supposed to have knowledge, I suppose. That's rather a controlling thing. And so the serpent there, and see, remember all the way back to Van Eyck with his Adam and Eve, and there was a sort of distinction between Adam, who was really naturalistic and anatomically correct, and you know, even the suntan and things like that. And then Eve was slightly more generalized. You got the idea that he had a male model, but maybe it was inappropriate to look at a naked female. And it's rather the same here. I mean, there's this sort of a degree of distortion, a sort of attenuation in Cranach's work, but still he's sort of real, and she's really not somehow. And again, a hungry-looking lion. Again, I'm not quite sure the symbols in there, because what we're seeing, this is the amazing Dürer, one of these early engravings that he does. Well, again, it's not really fair to compare the two, but because as we'll see, he's sort of trying to be classically correct, sort of harking back to Apollo Belvedere's and statues of Venus and things like that. Too much starch in the hair. Yeah, I think, whoa. But it's the same sort of thing. But again, what we'll see is this amazing detail. There's a goat just about to take a jump off a rock right there. And you know, the whole thing is this big. And this is, again, the technical beauty. And what we'll see, I'm not quite sure what the animals specifically mean here, but when we get to this one next time, these are actually illustrating the four humours, and I read off the whole deal about the four humours the other day. I won't have to do that again. But it's all the phlegmatic and the choleric and things like that. So they have very specific meanings, as the ox, the elk, a bunny, and a cat. And, well, a soon-to-be... Oops, I hit the wrong button. There's a soon-to-be ex-mouse right there. I mean, look at it again. Well, the AGO has some there. I remember when they bought a version of this, because the curator of prints over there was quite determined to wait until she got a really good impression. And I think she paid something absurd like $100,000 for it, which was, and this was probably 30 years ago. It's an enormous amount of money, but you know, now, and the sad thing is that I've got a version of that, which it's all about condition. It's like baseball card, you know, it's got a crease, it's not worth nothing. And this one, it was collected by my great uncle, and he liked to save a couple of bob here or there, so he got the sort of cheap versions that were slightly damaged. And my one's actually got a little patch in the corner, which makes it rather, because that one, $100,000, be about $200,000 maybe. Now it's about 89 cents because it's got the things. So I can't sell it and go and live in the south of France, I'm afraid. But it is on loan to the AGOs, so if you want to go have a look at it, you can just go to the prints and drawings room and ask. They might have another version, a better one. But this is, again, hard to imagine anything quite this clever. So this is, again, the sort of slightly strange distortions of Cranach. Now you've got even busier. Look at the tree of life. Whoa, it's like a Christmas tree all lit up with all these lovely fruits above. And don't forget, in the Bible it never says an apple, it just says the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And now you've thrown in 100 animals. Dürer had 4, which all had real significance, but now you've got lions and horses and deer and storks and grouse, just every damn thing. And sheep, there's too much stuff in a way. And it's amazing how well behaved the little bits of shrubbery are, isn't it? How they just land there. But you've also got grapes, which is Eucharistic, of course, equals blood of Christ. And see, there he is, poor old Adam. He's just this dumb guy scratching his head because, you know, it's never his fault. He's just doing what he's told. And look at Eve's anatomy, though. I mean, apart from this wonderful hair, wow. Again, the slight sort of distortions. He's real, but she's kind of artistically amazing. So you get the sense again that he hadn't actually seen. But another happy couple, because you can now transfer into mythology. Now, we haven't seen any mythology, hardly, have we? Well, there was that little Van Eyck portrait of Timotheus, which was a reference back to ancient Greece. But this is, again, if we were doing the Renaissance at this time in Italy, you know, the slide away from this sheer pure religious stuff, you might get more and more into Greek mythology, Roman mythology. But you need the educated audience to do that. There's no point in painting pictures of Hercules or whatever if nobody's heard of Hercules. So it implies that people like this elector that he's working for are well enough educated, which they would have been. But if you're a cardinal, you probably have had to study in Rome. Although it was one of those jobs, again, you just bought it. A couple of $100, you could be a cardinal. And then you had wonderful revenues from everything. That was another complaint, obviously, of Martin Luther, was just that everything in the church was basically for sale. But this is Apollo, and his twin sister, Diana. So he's god of the moon. No, lying too. He's god of the sun god, and she's the goddess of the moon. In this wonderful yoga pose. Can you all do that? No, I don't think it's that easy, especially if you have to hold it for 3 days while somebody paints you. So again, you have to sort of assume that there's nobody actually sitting there getting painted. And I mean, there might be some sort of astrological significance here, because of course they all have their constellations and things. But I think it's more just sort of an exercise in sort of the body in a very decorative way, because he is sort of, I mean, this is probably the most influential of all the works of antiquity, the Apollo Belvedere, he's called. And he provides the sort of standard for the body beautiful, and because he is the sun god, but he's also the god of reason and enlightenment, and he drives away. He's sort of firing his bow at superstition and darkness, and all of that kind of, bringing light to the world in every single sense. And unbelievably idealizing it, because if I'm going to shoot arrows with it, I don't think I'd drape my cloak so elegantly over my arm. It's sort of going to get in the way, isn't it? But artistically it's wonderful, because you can have this contrast between the smoothness of the flesh and the kind of the convoluted folds of the drapery, and incredibly classical features. I mean, all of that kind of. So sort of he's doing that here, but in a kind of wonky way. Because the end result doesn't appear classical at all. Certainly any Italian would have just sneered at this and thought it was absolutely dreadful. I have no idea what the date, 1500 near enough, it doesn't matter. It belongs to the Queen, it's in the Royal Collection. And she really does know what she's got, She does actually walk around and look at the art, which is a nice thing to and Charles knows quite a lot about it as well. Now, the character that I think most fascinates Cranach is actually Venus. Again, so we're back to antiquity, the goddess of love and beauty and youth and everything else, but never ever represented in quite this weird and wonderful way. This is actually, you could get sort of the pocket size. This is only 15 inches high. You get the life-size one. This is in Frankfurt. Someday I'm going to get a connecting flight that isn't 3 hours, so that you've got time actually to run into time. They've got quite a lot of good things in the Frankfurt Gallery. So here she stands, again, in this marvellously elegant pose on the little sort of mini landscape, all little sort of shells virtually that she stands on, with some lovely jewellery. Now, if you want to cover your nakedness, I've got one word for you, which is flannel. Because this isn't going to do it, is it? I mean, it's obviously designed to reveal more than it conceals somehow, and to add to her sensuality. But she's a creature of pure artistic. See, the other thing that this is about, it's late, it's 1532, and if you know your Italian art at this time, you've got this awful thing, well, not awful, called mannerism, which is basically a rejection of and a reaction to the politically correct world and artistically correct world of people like Raphael, who are the pinnacle of perfection of high Renaissance art, where everything is balanced and unified and looks back to antiquity for perfection, basically. So, and it's images of the Madonna. She's perfect, the art is perfect, everything's perfect. And then along comes Luther, Protestant Reformation. Along comes things like the sack of Rome, which was very traumatic. I mean, the troops fighting with Charles V, who I mentioned, looting and pillaging and throwing the Pope in jail, for God's sake. And that is sort of, seen as divine retribution for all of the corruption within the church itself by certain people. And so art has to reflect that. So the art becomes very elongated and contorted and distorted and sort of asks more questions than it provides answers the way that Raphael does. But I don't think this is... See, in Northern Europe, in Italy, it's reacting very specifically against classical ideals and early Renaissance perfection. In Northern Europe, you haven't really had that. So there's nothing to react against. So I think this is much more, almost sort of by coincidence, that an artist takes the figure and twists it around a little bit and plays with the proportions and makes it something which is of artistic beauty but actually couldn't possibly, you hope, exist in the real world. Because she gets skinnier and skinnier and taller. This is still Venus, and one of his favourite themes is with, this is about 5 feet high, I think it's the one that's in Berlin, with her little boy Cupid. And there's very often a little inscription, because the moral of the message is that love hurts, basically. Because this silly little bugger, he's gone and stolen a honeycomb, and the bees are all buzzing around, and they're going to sting him, and he's going to get hurt. And more flannel needed here. And so this is the thing, even Venus, she's the one that shoots you with arrows all the time. Remember, gold makes you fall in love, lead makes you hate the first thing that you see. So she knows what's going to happen, so she's almost warning against her own skills when she shoots you. She's getting there with the nice hat, but that's just to show with the it'll be long in a second. An even nicer hat in a second, because it's kind of Longinus's hat. Now, see, this is so different. I almost wonder sometimes about the attribution of some of these works, all the way back to the earlier artists in the course, that again, it gets sort of almost tedious to worry about who did what. But this has an ungainliness. I mean, this is unbelievably elegant and sophisticated. This is sort of courtly art. I think it's almost more like where we came in with people like the Limburg brothers, where people were sort of rather paper thin and aristocratic looking, rather than the sort of reaction against something. But this is sort of rather stumbly somehow. And he's much more trying to ow, ooh, ow, ooh. So again, don't steal honeycomb. They're very odd-looking bees as well. I'm not keen about them somehow. Anyway, that's all right. I'm just wondering where his signature is. Oh, there it is. See, still they've got the wings up. That's all right. Oh, here she's got the hat. Oh, look at that. And again, talk about sort of mixing, because this is the tree of knowledge, isn't it? It's exactly the same kind of thing with the same sort of landscape in behind. But now it's Venus and Cupid, sort of Venus dangling from it. So obviously nothing to do with the Garden of Eden, but it's just, it's a nice decorative sort of thing that he's chosen to illustrate. And again, this lovely hat, completely naked except for the hat, and he's getting stung again. And see, now he's even thrown in some sort of Garden of Eden type animals in the background that don't really have much to do with the story. And again, just a reminder of what the hat looked like, because it is the same one. Now, you might be feeling a bit sorry for Venus having to stand around all day. Occasionally she gets to lie down, although it's not actually quite Venus, she's the nymph of the spring, basically. And again, don't worry about these, because they're all just to show a particular... Cranach is really one of the most recognizable artists, I think, ever. This individual stuff. This is actually me. You can see the white thingy there. This picture's in Washington, and I'm just being reflected in the glass. So anyway, this is it's sort of almost like a Venus thing, because she's got arrows to shoot at people. But this is the idea of the source, S-O-U-R-C-E, the source of divine love and knowledge and everything. You've got the little water fountain spouting away in the background. But again, if she stood up, she might have a bit of a hard time wandering around the room, wouldn't she? And certainly, if you compare it to probably the most beautiful of all female nudes in the entire history of art, and I will arm wrestle anybody who argues with Titian's wonderful Venus of Urbino, and these are about near enough the same time. Actually, because I think that one is... I'll never find. I think this is just after the sun has died. So is that it up there? I don't know if I'm zooming enough. Those are supposed to be the wings down. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But this is perfection in every single way of female beauty and ideals, and just literally putting femininity on a pedestal somehow. It's absolutely good. It's in the Uffizi. I remember last time I was in the Uffizi a couple of years ago. From about 5 rooms away, I was thinking, I'm going to see Venus of Urbino. Getting all excited. I came into the room and there's a blank space on the wall, a little sign saying, "Gone to Tokyo." Anyway, this is actually, it's not the same, it's slightly different. So he just does all these weird and wonderful things. And he'll again, just quickly, he'll tell them into the 3 graces. and you've never seen them quite as elegantly shown as that. And there's a model sort of I want to go into. Whoops, here's Longinus' hat again, and/or Venus' hat. But now it's Paris. This is that famous mythology. And see, this is an old mythological storyline. So again, you're assuming an educated audience in that area, not to go all into the details because it gets quite complicated. But it's sort of a mythological beauty pageant between Juno, Athena, and Venus. And of course, the winner is big drama. It's got to be Venus because she's the goddess of love, and love conquers all. That's the idea. So that's Paris who's been shipped in to do the judging. This is Mercury looking rather un-Mercury-like somehow. And you know, they're interestingly strange pictures. That's the only way to put it. This is the same scene basically, but now without the hat. This is another thing called the choice of Hercules, where Hercules has to choose between virtue and vice. And you know damn well he wants to go off with vice because you know she's much sexier. And usually again lots of flannel for virtue because she's absolutely pure and untouchable. And I think this is actually a bit rude. You know, Vice has grabbed hold of his big stick with her hand there. This is the emblem of his virility, along with his lion skin. I think that's a bit naughty. Well, it's not that naughty. And I'll just show you one amazing portrait. If you ever, this is a fellow called Duke Heinrich the Pious. And if I'm Duke Heinrich the Pious, I'm not sure if I'm terribly happy with this portrait because I've disappeared completely. In this amazing costume. They used to actually sort of slash through one level of material to get sort of a little through to the next one. And he got a pretty nice hat. And it's actually got an incredibly good dog as well in this one. So, as I say, I don't think the Duke quite gets his money's worth somehow. So my last crank I want to show you is this one here, because it's rather good. It's called the Fountain of Youth. And remember in Bosch's Garden of Earthly Light, there was some of the Fountain of Youth in the middle with all those lovely ladies, but they were all youthful, and the Fountain of Youth wasn't actually doing its job. It was more the sort of bath of Venus somehow. But in this case, the point is, and this is a big picture, it's 1.25 meters high, close to 2 meters wide. It's in Berlin. And what it illustrates basically is that we all want to stay young forever. We want immortality. And you have to be see what happened, it's not the best image. See all of these wagon loads of incredibly elderly ladies and they're on a little sort of stretcher thing, and I love this, a little wheelbarrow with you, and you know, people are giving you piggybacks, and then you're stripping naked, and you jump in the water, and you're still a bit wrinkly and saggy, and then but gradually you get your boobs back and everything else comes back and you're young and then you splash around and you get to recline like the nymph of the spring over there, and then you come out of the water and some nice fellow said, get over there in the tent, and in the tent you get all these lovely clothes, and then you go over here and you have a lovely feast and you get to do some dancing with some happy young men. It's good, isn't it? Because again you start off these wrinkly old and nobody likes that. See, so you end up over here. And in the middle is actually Venus and Cupid standing there. So they're sort of overseeing everything. Good, isn't it? I like that. But again, they're all very weirdly proportioned and strange and uniquely Kranach. I think that's the only way of putting it. So, don't want to see that. I want to start off on Dürer, and we'll just look at about 20 minutes or so of him today, half an hour. And that'll get us started because he's another, when you really look him up, Google him, check out some of it, look at the highlight sheet. I've got a lot of images on it, but again, check particularly the sort of capital letter ones, because he's enormously important. And what we see is this is again one of the most important of all self-portraits, which I'll come back to in just a little minute, but just to show you that this is painting this exactly in 1500, which is handy. It's got the date right there. That's his famous monogram, A.D. Albrecht Dürer, which you see all over the place on his paintings and his prints and everything else. And his dates are 1471 to 1528, so it's pretty much the same as as Grunewald even, and or starting at least the same time as Cranach. 1471 more than that means he's actually 4 years older than Michelangelo and 12 years younger than Raphael. Again, just to put him in an international context. Now, I think what you see with Dürer, though, is, I mean, we've never met anybody like him before in this course. And remember, at the very, very beginning, if you can remember that far back, I said that the title of the course was actually a false advertising. There is no such thing really as a Northern Renaissance, certainly not for the stuff we've been covering. A little bit with Cranach because he was dealing with mythological subject matter, but in a kind of anti-classical style. Even Dürer is essentially the first artist to marry North and South, basically. And as we'll see, he goes to Italy a couple of times more. Two main trips. And he really thinks that the Italians have the secrets of artistic perfection. And that's what he goes to look for and to study, mostly in Venice. But this was a new, I mean, we saw someone like Roger going to Italy. He didn't even look at art as far as we can tell. Bruegel looked more at the Alpine scenery. And here is Dürer, who's actually got to look and learn, specifically, deliberately, because that's where the good art was. Later on, it just became, everybody had, I mean, even Rembrandt, when he was 23, this fellow comes to his studio and says, you're really good, you're going to be amazing, but if you want to be the best, you have to go to Italy, because that's kind of finishing school. So here is Dürer, who sees himself, I mean, I think, again, we're coming back to this portrait in just a bit, but it's how you see yourself as an artist that I think is so important here, which is different. Again, there's been other self-portraits, but never, ever quite like this. And he was an enormously prolific artist, one of those workaholics. You sort of get that he never took a day off in his life. He was a painter, he was a printmaker, a writer. He kind of stopped painting towards the very end of his life and just wrote books on theory. And I don't think he did any sculpture. It'd be interesting if you could figure that one out. But he was also, I mean, he was an intellectual because he was the friend, he was the equal of all sorts of, of the scholars of the day, basically. Particularly there was a chap, did I put him in here? Yeah, his best friend was Willibald Pirkheimer. Don't have to worry about him, but we'll meet him again in a bit. So basically what Dürer is he's a true Renaissance man. And that's a phrase we haven't been able to apply to any of it before. Because even though they did lots of jobs and they were Wasserkunstmachers and things like that, it's Dürer that has the sort of inquiring mind to delve into all these various areas. So he's a little bit like Leonardo in that way, who was, I mean, you have to keep remembering Leonardo, the painting for him was just one small percentage of his overall investigation into the world and life and everything else. And Dürer, I don't think he's nearly as profound in his investigations as Leonardo. But he just sort of represents the whole spirit of the age, I guess you could say, of humanism, of scientific inquiry, things like that. And again, as I say, almost as important as the art itself is his attitude towards it. He's very, very conscious of his status as the creator. I mean, who is he? He's Jesus Christ. He's put himself on a level footing with Christ, which might seem a little bit sacrilegious, but as we'll see in a bit, I don't think it really is. It's just this kind of new awareness of himself as the scholar, as the gentleman. I mean, painting was just part of his overall persona somehow. So, I think one illustration, if you like, of his realization of his own self-importance was that he did portraits of his mother and father. I don't think any artist up until now has done that. Why bother? I mean, nobody's going to buy these, so you're just wasting time and paint. It's almost worse than painting a self-portrait. So here he is sort of he loved to document his life and his genesis and where his genius comes from and things like that, the kind of lineage that leads up. But the father was actually, his Albrecht Sr., he was actually Hungarian. He was a goldsmith, but he travelled around a bit, spent quite a long time in the Netherlands, where we've just been, looking at art, but again, being a goldsmith rather than a painter. And eventually he settled in Nuremberg, which is where they had the famous trials after the Second World War. He's 20 years old when he got there. He died in 1502 when he was 75. But and again, don't worry about this tiny detail, but he worked with a local craftsman. There were sort of colleagues together, a fellow called Hieronymus Holper. And Dürer Sr. married Holper's daughter, Barbara. So again, there's lots of craftsmanship on both sides of the family, lots of good genes, basically. Because apart from being a great painter, not etcher, but printmaker, whatever you want to call it, he's also, the technical side of his work, even just from showing you a couple of those engravings earlier on, is really quite marvellous. Dürer said of his father that, again, what other artist bothered to write about their parents? He was a gentle and patient man who cared little for company and nothing for worldly amusements, which would probably sound like a lot like Dürer himself, to be honest. And this portrait again has a rather nice, tight, sort of simple piety. There's another one which is actually in the Uffizi in Florence, which is quite large, about 4 by 3 feet, and he's got again the piety. He's got the rosary in his hand, lovely hands. Fairly straightforward, bit of stubble, nice bit of stubble, nice sort of gentle hands there. And then the mother, Barbara, also with the rosary, you can see in the painting here. She bothers me a little bit. She doesn't look terribly happy, does she? And maybe I can explain that in just a second. But this again is sort of quite fashionable, the headdress that we've seen. It's different, but emphasizing that kind of up-to-date quality. This is an amazing drawing that Dürer did of his mother in 1514. You can see the date. She died when she was 63. That's written there as well. And you can see actually that he's sort of scribbling. Again, the idea of documentation. He'll do self-portraits, and he'll come back later on and he'll put little annotations, almost like he would do photographs in an album. Just sort of, his sort of thoughts about a particular thing. And the mother, she's said to be the only person that he ever really loved, and he wrote about her. My pious mother, again, who wrote about their mother at this time? My pious mother bore and brought up 18 children. That's not the record by any means either. Holy smokes. Often suffered from the plague and other serious illnesses, experienced great poverty, mockery, contempt, and criticism, and yet never became vindictive. Yikes. But I think she appears here as an extraordinary, pathetic figure in the proper sense of the word, and, filled with pathos somehow. And it's a mercilessly accurate portrait. She just looks sick and exhausted and ready to die at any minute. This careworn face, but I think very objective and very sympathetic, very loving. Both parents are given great dignity in these images. But again, the fact is that he's doing them in the first place. And hanging on to the drawings, little souvenirs, little mementos, if you like. Just nobody else is going to want them except for him. So he was actually the third of these 18 children. There were 2 younger brothers, they also became artists. I think these were the only ones who ever reached adulthood, which is, you raise 18 children, they all just drop dead on you. That's awful. So he was actually born on May 21st, 1471, in the town of Nuremberg, where his father had settled. And quite naturally, he started training with his father to be a goldsmith. And he did that till he was 15. So again, it's that idea. Imagine goldsmith, little rings and little precious bits of jewelry. That meticulous craftsmanship that's going to stand him in good stead later on, particularly in his printmaking. And something that comes out in this extraordinary self-portrait. He's 13 years old. Think back to what you were doing when you were 13. Probably wasn't anything quite this clever. It's in the Albertina, which is Vienna, and it's kind of the prints and drawings gallery, because you've got the Kunsthistorisches Museum, a whole bunch of other great galleries. But the print works on paper tend to be in this place called the Albertina, which is right near a lot of really good famous food places, just to attract you there. But you'll never see it because they don't display the works, they'll display facsimiles, and just they're so sensitive to light, that sort of thing. 1484 he did this, again as I say, age 13, so clearly a prodigy. As far as I know, this is just about the first ever self-portrait in the whole history of German art, and it's a 13-year-old doing it. And I'm sure there must be others, but it's not by anybody that important. And I think it's rather sort of, the sort of rather angular lines, particularly in the drapery, rather typical maybe of late Gothic art in some ways, but extraordinary assured handling of all these various textures. Even the expression is wonderfully done. And the most extraordinary thing in some ways is it's done in silver point. And remember all the way back to Roger and his portrait of, not quite right, of St. Luke, well maybe the self-portrait of St. Luke drawing the Virgin with the silver point. And as I said, this very unforgiving medium, but it's touching the metal to the paper which has been coated. So the line is created chemically, I guess, and you can't rub it out. So you have to get it right first time. And there's very few, if any, ever mistakes. The other thing, the little mistake on the finger, he sort of pulled it back a little bit. It was a bit longer once. It couldn't have been that long, so the whole hand must have been a little bit further over. But anyway, he changed his mind a tiny bit there. But even the thing, I mean, you sort of think maybe, is he sort of pointing towards his destiny, or there seems to be a self-awareness of, which is quite extraordinary. Also, I mean, I guess you all do self-portraits a lot. The hardest thing to get right is if you're right-handed, because that keeps moving. So, he's looking in the mirror, so he just shoves his right hand up his sleeve and just gets rid of it. That's pretty smart for a 13-year-old. Now, this is another extraordinary. There are a number of these self-portraits. I think he does more self-portraits, drawn and or painted, than any other artist before Rembrandt. And Rembrandt does 123 almost. It feels like that. And he did about 2 a year almost throughout his life. But this is an extraordinary thing. It's actually in a university called Erlangen. I've no idea what that is. Just pen and ink now, not silver point. 1492, 93. So he's 21, 22 years old, something like that. It's actually rather quickly done. On the other side of the piece of paper is a study for a Holy Family, so it's just recycling and useful use of paper, which was pretty expensive. But I don't think any artist has shown themselves. I mean, first of all, you're doing a self-portrait, which is rare enough at this time. But in this kind of moody, broody, introspective, sort of like a 19th century French romantic, like Jericho, mooning around, looking all arty. The idea of the sort of melancholia of the artist, very introspective, very thoughtful somehow. And again, I think the extraordinary thing is, the first one he did it in the first place, but then he hung on to it. And then other people hung on to it. Because drawings really weren't all that important. I'm talking very occasionally, not many artists even did drawings at this time, or didn't bother to keep them. Because usually they were preparatory studies for paintings. Once you did the picture, there was no point in keeping the drawings. You just light the fire with it or whatever. It's not a collectible. But it becomes that way with people like Dürer, and it becomes that way with people like Raphael and Michelangelo and Leonardo down in Italy. And in fact, Martin, something like that, whoever wrote that inscription down there, it wasn't him, and he got it wrong. No, it's not Martin Schongauer. Anyway, whatever it is, that's not who we're looking at. And this is odd, isn't it? It's a head, a hand, and a beaten-up cushion. That'll come into my beaten-up cushion. And he hasn't quite figured out his monogram yet. This is about 1493 or so a little bit earlier on. It's in the Metropolitan Museum. And again, there's no sort of thought-provoking quality here whatsoever. It's just you're using yourself sort of as a cheap model. You're just practicing your skills with your pen and ink, basically, just sort of nice cross-hatching and things like that. But when you see things like that, I think you can sort of see an engraver at work, because that's kind of how you do your shading with engravings very often. So one medium essentially slides over to the other, but it's still relatively straightforward. And that isn't. I mean, this is the weirdest looking self-portrait ever. I mean, it's almost, you've got to go to the cheap psychiatrist for this one. But it is a self-portrait. And it's Dürer as what's called the Man of Sorrows. It's Christ with the whip of the flagellation. And, he's not exactly a heroic figure. I mean, he can do a few sit-ups and things, maybe. He's got, so it's an odd thing, isn't it, to show yourself in this sort of Christ-like way somehow. And this is very, very late on, 1522. And, we're getting towards the end of his life. Anyway, what happens is that 1486, when he was 15, that's when he talked his father into not making him be a goldsmith. And that's sort of difficult. He's probably the only son who can really carry on the family business, so it must have been a bit of a wrench for the father to allow him to go in a different direction. But he studied for 4 years with a local artist in Nuremberg called Michael Wohlgemuth, and now he's painting his teacher. I mean, that's another little bit of documentation with all this sort of scribble written up there, just so we know who he is. And quite a bit later on he does this, 1516, you can see. But he studied, as I say, 4 years with this fellow, and again, it's like all geniuses, how much you learn from your teacher. You learn the craft of art. Michelangelo studied with Ghirlandaio, and some guy called Bertoldo, who nobody said, but you learn how to put things together, basically, artistically. And that's what Dürer got from Wohlgemuth, just the technique of art. And because well-established, they would have a number of pupils, apprentices, all working there at the same time. And Dürer always complained that his fellow students gave him a hard time, presumably because he was just too damn serious, wouldn't join in all the fun in the studio, that sort of idea. But again, it's the idea of documenting. You want a record of who your teacher was. And this is a painting by Wohlgemuth, which is utterly unimaginative. I mean, they're really nice things, but we've seen this over and over again, the sort of nativity scene with the ox and the ass, and old Joseph twiddling his thumb. Oh, he's twiddling his thumb, isn't he? And the shepherds, and nice open landscape. It's okay, little scrawny Christ child. But there's nothing new or different. It's just, same old, exactly what was wanted. In the spring of 1490, now he's still a teenager, 18, 19 years old, so this is when Dürer begins his Wanderjahre. They get the wander years, the gap year, basically. And he actually he's got 4 wander years. He really travels around. We don't know too much about where he went to begin with, but probably up to over to the Netherlands, where his father had been. He might have even had some connections over there. But then he really wanted to study with an artist called Schongauer. Oh, I thought I had a Schongauer to throw in, but I didn't. Who, again, was pretty big at the time. But he lived in Colmar, which is very near where the Isenheim Altarpiece was, which hadn't been painted yet. Anyway, he goes all the way to Colmar to study with Michael Schongauer, but Schongauer had been dead for almost a year already. News travelled pretty slowly at that time. But Schongauer had some brothers, and they all told Dürer that he had to go to Basel in Switzerland, where another Schongauer brother was working as an artist. So off he goes to Basel, which at this time was a pretty important intellectual centre. We'll see Holbein ending up in Basel in a little while. And so during all this time he paints this portrait with this rather spiky flower. 1493 he did it, so he's in his early 20s. The picture's in the Louvre. And the flower is either an Eryngium or an Eryngium. I think I googled both of them and neither of them exist, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, somehow it's a symbol of love and desire. And in fact, up at the top, it says, "My affairs shall go as ordained on high," which is pretty good stuff again. But what happened was, I mean, if it's up on high, it's got a pretty bad sense of humor, I guess. Because when he gets back to Nuremberg, in fact, he's called back to Nuremberg because his father has arranged a marriage for him, which took place on July the 7th, 1494. And the father-in-law was a fellow called Hans Frey, F-R-E-Y, who was a wealthy watchmaker and fountain designer. Another of these good, what the hell are they doing together, sorts of jobs. And he gave, with his daughter Agnes, he gave a dowry of 200 florins, which apparently was a pile of money. You always married for the dowry rather than for love, it seems, at that time. So from that point of view, it was a very successful match. In every other way, though, it seems that it was a total disaster. This is his drawing. He called it Mine Agnes. My Agnes quite early on. And it's rather nice. I think it must have gone on by that point. This is, again, now a quotation from, this is Willibald Pirkheimer, yet again, who, well, Agnes, she was 15 when they got married, which, that might have been a little bit older at that point. And it's does appear to be quite nice, but from all accounts she does appear to be stupid, hysterical and shrewish. But actually not from all accounts, from one account written by a friend, Willibald Pirkheimer, who did this actually after Durer's death. When he died when he was only 57 in 1528, and just after his death, Willibald Pirkheimer wrote this. And this is the first time I've ever done this sort of bio stuff, because you sort of need all the background and everything else. But it's also quite good. I like this description. Willibald writes, he said, I can ascribe his death, Durer's death, to no one but his wife, Agnes. For she so gnawed into his heart and to such a degree tormented him that he departed hence sooner than he would have done. He was shriveled up like a bundle of straw and dared never seek for amusement or go into company, for she was always uneasy, though there was no need for her to be so. She watched him day and night and drove him to work hard for this reason alone, that he might make even more money to leave it to her when he died. One would prefer a loose woman who was at least friendly to such a gnawing, suspicious and scolding pious one, with whom no rest can be had day or night. So you never get to hear her side of the story, unfortunately. It'd be rather good. But it's, I think, I mean, given the end result you see here, it's hardly surprising that 2 months after his marriage, Durer took off on his honeymoon to Venice, which is a wonderfully romantic place to go. Still is, if you can stand the crowds. But the difference is that he went on his own, which is not really your normal honeymoon situation. And in Venice, he painted this quite splendid self-portrait. I'm going to show you 2 self-portraits now, and then that will be enough for today. He does this one in 1498. It's in the Prado in Spain. And it's actually quite typical of the sort of Northern European corner portrait type. We've seen that sort of thing a little bit before. But he's dressed in very, very fashionable Venetian costume. He's got an exotic, almost peacock-like quality to him. Very solidly posed, as you can see, with the arm resting on a little ledge, and the hands clasped. I guess that's one way to keep them sort of not moving too much. Monogram, I can't honestly remember what it says there. Have I got it written down? No. Just had his hair down. I mean, he's so in love with himself. No wonder poor old Agnes can't get a word in edgewise, because this is the most narcissistic sort of image. I mean, he's very sensual and sexy, I guess. And as I say, height of but beautifully done. Look at them. They're just, again, the technique. Even throwing that little ropey bit there, throwing down a little shadow, the sort of punching out of three-dimensionality. And again, all of the stuff needs double, does he? Because he's got this rather nice young beard. But it's all about ego. And again, name another artist this time from Northern Europe who's doing self-portraits like this. Nobody. And so it's partly, again, to document, this is what I looked like in 1498, that sort of thing. Because, again, absolutely nobody would ever want to have this portrait hanging on their living room wall. I mean, I've always wondered about Rembrandt's self-portraits, because there are so many. I mean, there's something like 60. So imagine Rembrandt coming home at the end of the day. He's quite old. He comes in the door. There he is when he's 23, he's 25, he's 27. We're all up the stairs. Now he's getting older and older. I mean, it'd be horrible. It's sort of like the reverse of the portrait of Dorian Gray. Now you've got all these images of you gradually decaying. It's depressing as hell. Or he must have maybe just kept them all in the back room. Because nobody ever bought the stuff, that's for sure. Very, very rarely during his lifetime. He was a painter. Why would you want his picture in your house? Anyway, I think this is really a splendid thing. But again, so what he's shown, there's no indication here that he's a painter. In fact, Rembrandt will paint himself with a palette and a brush because he's got a job. Rubens would never do that because he's a snob. And he shows himself with the big stick and the big hat, and he's the prince of painters, the gentleman, the scholar, everything. So here he is, Durer is, as almost in denial of the fact that even the fact that he's got the gloves on. The gloves are kind of symbolic, usually of humanistic scholarship and learning. And if you wear soft, sort of chamois gloves like this, you don't get your hands, you're not a workman with getting your hands dirty, which is what painting was. It was manual labor. So it's kind of, you're upgrading yourself to a certain extent. But he appears to be sort of highly rational and self-controlled. from that point of view, but very much the dandy, the playboy, I guess you could say. And I found that a little while. I love that. Do you all know and love Norman Rockwell? He was put in the dumpster for a long time. Now people are actually starting to realize he was quite clever, quite a good recorder of American way of life. He did lots of magazine illustrating and things. But here he's doing his self-portrait, and it's quite a good sort of compendium, because there's little studies for the... There's the Dürer, there's a Rembrandt self-portrait, there's a Van Gogh, and there's a... I'm not sure what that is. Who did that? Somebody very modern. Anyway, but what's also interesting, this is what you do when you're painting a portrait, because in the mirror image, he's quite old, and his pipe's a little bit droopy. And in the point, he's got taken about 20 years off himself, hasn't it? And the pipe's gone way. So he sort of energized himself. That's rather good. This is how you see yourself, basically, rather than what you actually are. The other one, though, we'll finish off with this one today because it's just so extraordinary. This is 1500 and it's in Munich. And there's an inscription here. See, there's the monogram again, 1500. There's an inscription with, if I can see what it is, Albrecht Dürer from Nuremberg, painted myself thus in everlasting paint at the age of 28 years. So again, it's like the documentation somehow that comes out in that. And he wants everybody else to know that this is exactly what he was. But again, it's this kind of, it's a really in-your-face kind of portrait, isn't it? I mean, absolutely frontal, symmetrical. The only thing that really breaks the symmetry is just this rather bony hand that comes up, sort of. But wonderful textures. Again, this amazing hairdo. He's just come back from the hairdresser, the stylist, and the fur collar and things like that. Oh, that's all sort of absolutely beautifully done. But again, what you've done is you've removed yourself away from just sort of natural appearances, I guess. Because in fact, what we're looking at is look how the whole brow seems to glow, and that draws attention immediately. Other artists, Poussin did a portrait of himself. Again, this sort of throbbing intellectuality, as it were, coming out of the brains. So what you're doing is you're emphasizing, you're stressing the brain and the hand, the thinking and the doing. And this was, again, in Italy at least, maybe not so much in the north, the huge division between the contemplative life and the active life. I already mentioned at the time with St. Jerome, the Dürer. I said the companion to that, which we'll see later, is the guy on the horse, the active life. He is the scholar, the thinker, basically. So you think and you do. And you can't have one really without the other. So in a way you're emphasizing the fact that the skill of the painter, you're creating wonderfully supercharged ideas in your art, but you have to have the technique, the skill to do it. And lots of other artists have dealt with the same thing. But also what it is again, it's a very popular Italian philosophical idea. You have, and again, whether or not Dürer would have known it quite yet, I think he probably would. The distinction between what was called, and it's Plato basically, the disegno interno and the disegno esterno, which is the interior design, basically, disegno. But it's bigger than just design, it's just the whole thought process. All the wonderful stuff that runs around between your ears, but then also the disegno esterno, which is the doing of it. And most of us are really quite good at the disegno interno. I mean, we can think up one of it. It's the getting it done. It's getting it out from here to there. Writer's cramp, mental blocks, all those things stop you from... And if you're any good at all, you're never really satisfied with what you've done. Because in your brain, you had a slightly better idea of what it ought to be. You're probably the only person who knows that. Everybody else looks fine, maybe. But you know what it could have been, should have been, if you were just a tiny bit better. And there's always this kind of disconnect, like between disegno interno and disegno esterno. And to be honest, I think with Dürer, that's, if you like, almost the tragedy of him is, as we'll see, that some very strange things start to happen when he over-intellectualizes, and when he, again, particularly when he tries too hard to be an Italian, as we'll see, and I'll emphasize again next class, it's that I think, anyway, to my way of thinking, he's much, much better when he's sort of true to his northern roots than he is when he tries to overlay that with a kind of classical respectability somehow. But starting what we're looking at here is the idea, as I mentioned earlier, of the artist as creator. And there's a huge difference between creating and making. again, it's the sort of thinking and the doing. Making is just making stuff. Creating is the ideas behind the making, basically. And that's what and in fact, it's no coincidence that he's made himself look very Christ-like. In fact, he's got, this is from a Byzantine mosaic in Sicily. Even to the little sort of kiss cow thing, he's clearly, for anybody who knew, kind of made the connection to the image of Christ. So as I say, it might almost be a little bit sacrilegious to sort of upgrade yourself in this Christ-like way, but I think what he's saying essentially is that, even in his own writings, and he does lots of writing, he says the genius of the artist comes from God, but he's in a way equating himself with God and or Christ, who is the supreme creator. God created man in his own image, he brings things into existence that weren't there before, and so does the artist. And through divinely inspired creativity, you bring stuff into being that wasn't there before. So again, you are divinely inspired somehow. And I don't think any other artist we've been looking at would have bothered to come up with such sort of highfalutin ideas about themselves, and not even Van Eyck, he just got on with the job. He just had to do it better than most people. But I don't think he sort of sat around getting all moody about his art. But the other artists at about the same time, a little bit later on, who's also, this is almost only a self-portrait, it might be a portrait of Leonardo. Again, the supreme Renaissance man, the great genius of the day. And somebody drew him, or he drew himself, clearly in the image of God. And again, putting himself on that level of creative genius somehow. And this, again, nobody had thought of doing this before the Renaissance. You were just a craftsman, get on with it. Get making stuff. It's my work, I'm paying for it. You don't have to think. But Dürer is a thinker, as we'll see. I just thought that was because that's him in the image of Christ, if you like. And then he becomes Christ. So some guy called, I'll never remember his name. Yes, well, Georg Fischer, 1637, painted as Christ and the adulteress, but Christ is clearly Dürer with the same hairdo and everything else. It's a pretty awful painting, isn't it? But never mind. And then I just found that one. This is Dürer with bling. Again, if any of you find this sort of stuff, send it to me, because it's a good way to end a lecture. So anyway, so this is him off to Venice. So we'll pick up here next time. So again, please get your essays done. I've got 2 already, which is pretty good. Remember, and then just in case you weren't here when I said, if you don't have it in by next, and I'll write the instructions on my course, if you don't have it in by next class, which is Monday, after that, and I'll have to explain it again, because now you're starting to lose 2% a day, basically. It's like, you email it to me, then you bring the hard copy to the next class, which is hopefully Wednesday. And don't leave it dragging on and on and on beyond that. Okay? Any other questions? Still about essays, you better sort them out with me perhaps right now. Because if you haven't started yet, not good. Okay, anyway, have a lovely weekend.